Hello everyone. Sorry about the delay. We were trying to set up the live stream for YouTube, but YouTube doesn't seem to like us for 2 weeks in a row, so we're going to be recording it, and we'll be uploading this onto our YouTube channel afterwards, so you can always look back on it. You can always ask us questions here if you have other questions. We'll be able to give you an email at the end, or you can send us emails.
It's not showing. It's not actually live streaming. It's just because I want to be able to.
If it's something that goes live, we may switch it around, but knowing YouTube, it probably won't. Welcome everyone. Thank you for coming out to the second workshop for the Scinapse case competition. Quick question before we start. How many of you guys are in first and second year? One, and third and fourth year, or third and plus? Okay. And what programs are everyone in? Biomed? Biopharm? Biochem? Any other programs I'm missing? Biology? Chemistry?
Yeah.
And I don't think I got your program.
No, we're trying it together.
Oh, you're biomed as well? Okay. So chemistry, respect, I'm a master of chemistry, so. But used to be biochemistry, so being at UAlter for 4 years now, doing my first year master's in chem. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Scinapse.
I'm Rana. I'm in my third year of undergrad in biomedical music.
Without further ado, we'll go for the workshop. So right now, you guys are right here as far as the step one in the entire case proposal process. So we've released the case, but we're getting close to the deadline, which is 20 seconds, so next week if I remember correctly, at 11:59 p.m. So what we're going to help you here today, though, is to get through the requirements of what your proposal will have to include in your full proposal, specifically each individual component, and then a bit of how you can write each component, because for example, as far as the abstract is considered, how many people have written an abstract? 4. Okay, so you guys have experience, but we'll be showing you how to do it just in case you need a refresher. We'll be explaining how to choose your keywords and how to formulate your hypotheses, sort of how you should be going about your method section, and so on and so forth. We're also going to be talking about the new reference style we're going to be using this year. So who here has done Scinapse before? Okay. So previously we used an APA style formatting, but if you guys know what APA means, you would know that most science journals don't use that because it's a psychology-based journal that uses this formatting. Most journals in science tend to use a Superscript style formatting, so I'll be explaining about how you guys can go about that. But first, we're going to be talking about what the case this year is. So it's going to be about augmented biology. As far as how you can approach that, there are many different ways. You can look at the case at a medical perspective, or an environmental or agricultural. For medical, for example, maybe you're going to look at prosthesis, or creating new organs, or even just creating a plastic organ to replace a normal organ. We already do that, but maybe you can find something innovative. For environmental, maybe you can solve some sort of issue that's in the environment. Climate change is huge right now. So maybe you can use augmented biology to create a solution. As far as agricultural, we all know about the huge issue with GMOs, or not the issue, but more the controversy with them. So can you do a project involving that? Can you create a new kind of GMO? You also need to consider in more of what you know and sort of what you can innovate, because in the end, we want to have innovative thinkers. If you're going to propose agriculture and say, we're going to make this new kind of corn, I mean, that's already done. All corn wheat is GMO. So think about something innovative, but think about something that you're a personal expert in. You all have your own personal experiences. You've gone through life learning new things that other people haven't. Use that. The easiest way to look at this, though, is to characterize the problem you want to solve. So ultimately, you want to solve a problem, but how are you going to do that? So you're going to take the impact you want to generate, look at what the problems of generating that impact is, and then look at different methods you can approach. For example, prosthetic design, as I mentioned earlier. Or when you're looking at GMOs, are you going to use CRISPR? Are you going to use a different system? When you're looking at CRISPR, what is CRISPR? What can you do with CRISPR? So now as far as the actual proposal writing, so one thing we're going to require is the abstract. So the abstract, you can look at it as sort of the summary of the report. It's very, very quick, has very little fluff. That's an important factor, because abstract should be a condensed version of your entire proposal. It should quickly introduce the background. For example, let's say you're doing a proposal on heart disease. You could say that In North America, cardiovascular disease and stroke are the leading causes of death. Now, what's the problem with that you want to identify? Let's say it's the treatment methods. You can follow up with saying a meta-analysis of statins, a large variety of drugs used to treat heart disease, showed only 20% of people actually respond positively to it. So you now, in 2 sentences, identified a major problem that you want to fix. That's when you bring your hypothesis. Let's say you want to figure out how you can choose what drug to give someone so that their individual rate of success improves. Your hypothesis could be, we want to identify, or we want to see if biomarkers can be used to correlate improved success, life expectancy with specific drugs. So you've introduced a hypothesis, now you want to explain how you're going to test it and what you sort of expect to see. An easy way to test it, we're going to take patients who are on this drug and patients who aren't, and we're going to, patients who are on this drug, we're going to take biomarkers from them using mass spectrometry, and we're going to look at their life expectancies. People who have a higher life expectancy will see, did this drug have certain biomarkers that it interacted with? That way we know that people have this biomarker, we'll give them that drug. So you propose the hypothesis and the method you're going to use to test it, and sort of what you expect to see out of it. Then you're going to end with a quick concluding statement. The issue with this sort of is that you don't have conclusions. So in this case, you can end it with more of a hypothetical conclusion. If we find these biomarkers, we will have provided an advancement to medicine where we can treat people with precision medicine. Very quick, very simple abstract that summarizes an entire project. An important part about the key elements, though, you don't want to explain all the boring experiments because nobody's going to look at the hypothesis and say, oh, they did this simple experiment. Okay, if it produced extremely important data, that's one thing. But if it's just a simple experiment that didn't really show the data they wanted to show, you would never see that in abstract. You see the experiments that showed wow factor. For example, mass spectrometry, like I was explaining. Not everyone would expect to see that used here, but you can use it and you can explain it here. If you use Western blotting, well, it's not really a fun experiment because everyone does it, and it's a very common experiment to do. So it's not really something you would include in your abstract, unless you're using it in a scenario where it normally isn't used. Now we're going to go on to the background information. So what you want us to do with your background is you want to establish a base of information that's relevant to your proposal. This should be specific to what you're talking about, and should be built in a way that I should, like let's say I'm reading your proposal, I shouldn't have to go online and research something because it was in your experimental design, but was not explained in your introduction because it was confusing for some reason. It should also flow very well into the hypothesis and should be expanded. So in your abstract, you'll have maybe 2 or 3 sentences for your introduction. This should be much more than just 2 or 3 sentences. An important factor though is that it should be well cited. People who are reading your introductions are experts in the field. So they also are more often than not professors and know roughly what level of education you guys are at and what you guys would know. And if you're putting information that professors would have to cite when they're writing their own papers and you don't cite it, it's going to be very suspicious. So make sure you're citing everything very well because the people reading it will be able to catch it pretty easily. You should also connect everything that's already known, or at least the important factors of what's already known, to what you want to know. So when you're devising your hypothesis, it shouldn't just be something that has no basis in any research. It should be something feasible and something that could be interpolated from existing data, but in the end it's still a hypothesis because we don't know the answer. The easiest way to sort of visualize it is if you were to look at how broad or how precise an individual section is within your introduction, it should go from very broad to very narrow as you're approaching your hypothesis. So you can look at it as sort of like an inverted pyramid. It's very wide at the top and very narrow at the bottom. Now we're going to go to the hypothesis. So an important part of the hypothesis is that it has to be formatted in sort of an if something is whatever, then something else will happen. So the easiest way, for example, if there exists biomarkers in a patient, then we should be able to give them medicine based off that biomarker to improve viability. That's a hypothesis because you're saying, if this is true, then we should be able to do this. It has to be very precise and very testable. So a broad hypothesis is useless because there's no way to really prove it's right or wrong if it's not precise. It has to include the significance and the rationale of the proposal. So this is where you have to be very careful with your introduction, and you have to lead into the hypothesis in a way that you can explain the importance of what you're doing. So significance, it's what is the impacts on some of the negatives associated with augmented biology or the positives. So you have to make sure you're still linking it to this augmented biology case. The rationale is why would your experiment work? Because again, you're still basing it off of existing work. That's where your rationale comes in. Ultimately, you want to address the impacts of augmented biology. So you want to use augmented biology or address its impacts in your hypothesis. Your methods itself have to be very, it has to mention or reference the components of your hypothesis, because ultimately your methods are there to prove your hypothesis and do nothing else. You want to very clearly outline what the variables you're going to be manipulating are and what aren't going to be manipulated. These have to be very specific to the experiment you're doing. And you have to explain what it is that you're assuming. So if you're assuming something to be true, make it clear, because if you don't make that clear, the reader won't know what assumptions you're making. And they could be confused that, well, if they're not making this assumption, how could this be true? But if you make it very clear, I'm making this assumption, the reader will understand where your viewpoint is. You should also want to address any variables you can't control and how you can try to control it. So for example, let's say you're doing an experiment and you have to do it in air. Well, air is made up of many different molecules. You have CO2, you have nitrogen gas, you have oxygen gas. How do you know none of that's affecting your data? You have to try and control it. So you can try and say, well, we'll put it in an environment where we're controlling what's in the air. Or we're going to put it in an air-free, like an oxygen-free environment. Things like that. You have to be able to mention and discuss how you control it. And use diagrams. So this is very important because sometimes explaining something in words can be a lot harder than showing a diagram, especially when you only have 1,000 words to work with. And make sure you're keeping track of your own level of specificity. Again, you do have that 1,000 word limit for the entire report. You don't want to go above and beyond and have like 900 words be your methods, but at the same time, you don't want your methods to only be 50 words. So now, figures. When you're talking about figures, you're going to have figure captions in addition to the actual figure. In this case, figure captions are included in your word count. So make sure that your methodology is written with your figure. So if you're showing a figure that's the process of the experiment you want to do, or is a hypothetical data of what you would expect to get, make sure you're explaining in the caption what that experiment is. Because otherwise, someone reading the figure will say, what are you guys doing here? I don't know what experiment you're doing. So the next thing is that all figures have to be original. So you cannot just find a review paper that has a perfect figure and copy paste it into yours. Even if you cite it, that you can't do that only because you're trying to show that this is your experiment. Ultimately, by doing that, you're also showing off that this is not an original experiment. So you want to make every figure you do your own. You can reference an experiment done by another lab. You can do it almost the same way, just change one set of variables. That's completely fine, but the figure itself should be created by you, and you can reference the other figure if you want. As far as captions, again, oh sorry, my mistake here, the captions will not be counted, but you're only allowed 2 lines per caption. But the judges will skim over the figures, but at the same time, if a judge does look at a figure, they are looking for scientific accuracy. So you should use it to help your data, but you should not rely on it 100%. This is just more of a caveat that they're not required to read the caption. Most judges will, but it's not a requirement. So I wouldn't recommend putting all the important information in captions of your figure. They're going to see the figure, and it should be fairly self-explanatory if the figure is designed well. So beyond that, some more just extras to include in your proposal. So you should try and address anticipated results. Keep them hypothetical because you haven't actually done the experiment. So don't say, we found this. Say, if the experiment works as anticipated, this is what we would find. But you don't put any exact values because you can't predict that. But if you have a range of values that, if it were to fall in this range, would prove your hypothesis correct, say, if the values fall within this range, we can support a hypothesis. And this would also be used to lead in your conclusion. If the data falls within this range, we can state that we can prove our hypothesis. And we word that more specifically towards your hypothesis itself. But beyond that, that's how you would sort of express hypothetical data. References, in the end, will be included at the last section of your report. And be very careful when citing. I will say one thing, often in science, we don't take quotes from other papers. You make a statement that is supported by another paper and you include the reference. So if another paper said, adding GFP doesn't affect the cell, don't say, as this author stated, adding GFP would not affect the cell. You can just say, adding GFP doesn't affect the cell, reference. That is completely acceptable. As far as keeping track of your citations, you can use a reference management software if you've learned how to use one. If not, websites like EasyBib, where you can just plug in the name of an article and you can find a reference for that right away. I can make it for you. Completely acceptable as well. We did verify that the citation style we're using this year is on EasyBib. And on that topic, so the style we're using this year is a Vancouver style formatting. So in text, this means that you're going to be using superscripts as opposed to open bracket, author, year, close bracket, because it's just a lot more clean in text and is what is used in academia. That also means that in your references section, you're going to be ordering them based off the order they appear in text. So for example, if you had a statement like the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell and blood is red when oxygen is present, and you cited each of those, in your references section, you would have first the reference for mitochondria and then the reference for blood, even if the author's name for blood is alphabetically before mitochondria. So as far as how submissions work, so this year they're at 11:59 p.m. on November 22nd, and you're just submitted to this email over here. You can write this down now, or I can send you again the PowerPoint at the end. And just make sure again to check that you actually sent it, because if you sent it, but let's say your internet bugged out for a few seconds and didn't actually send, you don't want that to be the reason you don't end up sending it. As far as how you're going to be sending it, you're going to be sending two. So you're going to send one that has keywords and one that doesn't. So now about keywords. Keywords are essentially words that identify the entirety of your project as far as the important concepts go. For example, let's say yours were water, infrastructure, mosquito spread. You can probably already get a good idea of what that project is about just from those 4 words. The reason this is important too is for your own work when you're doing research as far as how to get your background information. When you search on Google Scholar, let's say, CRISPR-Cas9 double-stranded breaks, what you're going to find is you're going to get a bunch of articles that identify CRISPR-Cas9 and double-stranded breaks as their keywords. This is going to speed up your own research process, but it's also the reason why you guys have to include your own keywords for your report. Because we will also assign your report to judges based off of the keywords you choose. So if you choose keywords that are unrelated to your project, then a judge who doesn't actually know your topic will end up getting your report because the keywords weren't properly identified. If you need help with keywords, again, you can always email us. We can help you with some ideas. We can't give you answers, but we can help guide you to where you can find more resources. Beyond that, this is just a very quick rubric of how they're going to be marking your report and resources. So unfortunately, this isn't working as well as we expected it to.
We will upload the video though.
Yeah. But if you do need like one-on-one meetings, or if you just want to send us questions via email, just email us at this email here. Please include mentorship somewhere in the subject line. Otherwise, we won't know it's for us because this email is used by everyone in Scinapse. And then again, make sure you remember to submit on time because late submissions, it's out of our hand. We can't really accept any late submissions. And if you have any questions, now's the time to ask. But at the same time, we also have Google form here. There's a bit of a survey if you want to answer it quickly. But if you just fill in your email, that's enough to get the PowerPoint. It's not an automatic process, so on the weekend, I'll be able to just tally up all the emails and shoot you an email. But any questions?
Is there any section you guys are worried about the most?
So if you use the same reference twice, like once at the beginning of the
You would use the same superscript because the superscript is tied to the very first time it's mentioned. And then after that, you use the same number over and over. That's also one of the reasons we like using it, is because then you can see where that was originally brought up. So if you're confused about a topic, let's say, you brought up a thing in the introduction, and you use that information later on, and you said it again. I'm reading it that second time, I'm confused, like, well, wait, what do you mean by this? I can easily say, oh, it was number 2. I'll just look for where number 2 was referenced originally, and I can see, oh, that's the background you're referencing.
Of what references? Is that the word count included in our rule or
No. I don't believe references are, just because the references section is probably very massive.
Yeah, your references section isn't part of your.
Yeah, so anything with an asterisk here, so your abstract, your definition sheet, and your references are not included in your word count. Keywords at the same time are not included in your word count.
I'll re-ask some of the live chat questions.
Yeah.
I answered them, but just in case anyone else was wondering as well. One person wanted to know more about the depth of methods, so was specifically asking whether we need to include concentrations, where to get the reagents and stuff. So my answer to that was, you know how you have to write undergrad labs like your chemistry and they want everything specifically, like I measured out in a 25 ml beaker this much. That's not that kind of thing. So we suggest you guys look at some papers that exist to kind of get the gist of it, but you want to put the important methods, and like Varys already mentioned, you're not going to put like, oh, I did a Western and ran the gel for 2 hours, and because that's standard protocol. So anything that's innovative and important steps in your methods, you do need to put in.
I will say an easy way to identify how in-depth your methods should be is, unless you're doing a method that's never been done before, find a paper that's done something similar to what you're doing, and see how that paper worded their methods. They're gonna have a section which is like, we got this from this company, that from that company, which is where this question was probably coming from. But you do that section after you actually buy the reagents, not before that. So you don't have to do that because you didn't actually buy those, you didn't buy an antibody from Santa Cruz and then cry when your turn fails. Like in that case, you would say antibody like X purchased from Santa Cruz. But if you don't actually buy it because you didn't actually do the experiment yet, you don't have to include that section.
Someone else asked, how much overlap, if at all, can there be with existing innovation?
So it depends on what you mean by existing innovation. For example, recently there was published a CRISPR where they attached a reverse transcriptase enzyme to it. If you're just trying to say, well, we'll do the same thing, I wouldn't say that's innovative. If you're trying to do a new function that's never been added to CRISPR, but you're using a similar method, I'd say that's fine. Because that kind of stuff is what's happening right now. There's a few labs that are constantly changing CRISPR, publishing, and it's every time it's innovative. So they're adding a new function that's never been done before. So ultimately, that is sort of what you're trying to do. You're trying to do something that's never been done before.
But not so much so that there's no scientific background. Like, we want imagination to be a part of this, but not so much that we can't even call it science anymore, right? So there needs to be some grounding proof as well. So important to use existing innovation, important to add your own. Do you guys have any other questions?
How many of you guys have product ideas so far? Okay.
Oh. Have you guys started writing out a timelines? Yeah, you're all. Cool. Is anyone stressed? Yeah? Fair enough. So you're here.
The time frame is so short.
Yeah.
Especially since we're approaching finals week.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think that's why we tried to get the deadline at least 1 week before the start of finals, just so that you guys don't have to think about both at the same time. But one thing I will say is because, like, obviously not for this, but I've written case proposals for one of my class and I have to do another one for next week. When you start writing it, you're gonna, if it's a topic you really enjoy writing about, you're gonna run out of words. So what I will say is when you like you laugh, but
No, that's right. This is biology.
Yeah.
well, you don't have to take a biological group.
Oh, we're not.
Oh, okay.
We're not.
Fair.
We're having issues.
But in the end, like, think about something you want to. If you were to do an experiment, if you were to do the experiment you're proposing, would you enjoy doing it? And if not, then maybe you don't want to write about that because let's say you do make it to the next step. If you're not passionate about your topic, it'll be a lot harder to succeed. So think about what you want to do before you start writing, some crazy methods that honestly would probably be very fun to do.
Yeah.